Alright, so I'm just doing this video to show you guys how to do each of the problems in section 5.5. So 28 says f of x equals x squared plus 2x plus 3. We're going through the process of completing the square. So your first step is to trap the x's. You want to drop an x from both of them. You want to divide by 2. You want to square the parentheses. When you squared this, you've changed the equation or changed the function. You've added 1 squared to the equation, so you have to subtract 1. We're trying to solve it by completing the square, so we're going to set it equal to 0. I'm going to subtract 2 from each side. Apparently people really like this, so now we're going to square root it. Now the square root of -2, we can't do the whole thing, but we can do the square root of -1. This is the same thing as the square root of -1 times 2, or the square root of -1 times the square root of 2, which the square root of -1 is I. Remember that whenever I do a square root, I need a positive and a negative. And then the last step is going to be to subtract 1. You can put it at the end, but we kind of prefer to put it in the front when we're doing it like this. So I would put -1 plus and minus I square root of 2. So that's the answer to 28. '29 is a little bit more complicated just because it has a leading coefficient that is not 1. So it says 4x squared minus 3x plus 1 equals 0. We're still going to follow the first step, which is trap the x's. And then we're going to drop an x from each. And then we're going to factor out the 4. Divide by 2, which means the same thing as multiplying by 1/2. So it becomes -3/8. Now, I know what I told you guys to do before was to square this, but in order to make it a little bit more simple, I'm going to actually try to get this parentheses alone before I do anything else, which means I'm going to subtract 1. And then I'm going to divide by 4. This is the same thing I would have gotten later on, but I'm trying to make it a little bit more simple on myself, okay? Now I'm going to square this, which means that I've added something to the equation. I've added 3/8 squared, which is the same thing as 9/64, so I'm going to add that to the other side. I need to have a common denominator in order to combine them. So this would be times 16, so -16/64 plus 9/64, which is going to be -7/64. I'm going to square root both sides. This I can break it up into the square root of -7 over the square root of 64. The only reason I would want to do that is because the square root of 64 is 8. Square root of -1 is I. So that's a little bit more appealing to the eye. It doesn't actually matter. You can leave it like this and bring the I out. And then I'm going to add this to the other side. So I'm going to get 3/8 plus and minus I square root of 7 over 8. But you could have also gotten 3/8 plus or minus I square root of 7/64. That would have been fine as well. Okay, either way, it doesn't really matter. 30, it tells me x squared plus 4x plus 8. Trap the x's, drop an x from each. Divide by 2. Square it. When I squared this, I added a number to this side, which is 4. I'm going to put that on the other side. I'm going to subtract the 8. I'm going to square root both sides. Square root of -1 is I. The square root of 4 is 2. Remember that I want positive and negative when I do the square root. I'm going to subtract 2. I'm going to have -2 plus and minus 2i. (31) tells me 3x squared minus 6x plus 10 equals 0. Trap the x's. Drop an x from each. Divide by 2. Factor out the 3. Same thing as I did on the other one that had a leading coefficient that wasn't 1. I'm going to try to get this alone. Well, actually, I'm going to do it the old way this time just so you can see it both ways. I'm going to square it. Remember, when I square this, I need to multiply it by this number. So I haven't added 1 to this side. I've actually added 1 squared, which is 1, times 3, which is 3. So I have to add 3 to the other side. Subtract 10. Divide by 3. Do the square root of each side. And then add the 1. I'm going to bring out the negative by making it an I. And that's the answer. Now for the easy ones. 31 is just asking you for the complex conjugate. Complex conjugate is what would make the I, the opposite sign of the I. So the complex conjugate of I is negative I. That's the answer. 32. It appears as though I did not put that. Oh, that one was 32. 33. Negative square root of 3 over 2 minus 2i. Complex conjugate. Negative square root of 3 over 2 plus 2i. Just changing the sign of the I. So that's the answer. 34. Negative 2.5i plus 1. Complex conjugate. 2.5i plus 1. Just changing the sign of the I for the complex conjugate. 35 I over 10 plus 1. Complex conjugate, negative I over 10 plus 1. Just changing the sign of it. I hope that makes sense.